Hi and welcome to another training video. Today's video was inspired by an Excel meetup that I went to last night, and a lot of the content was on Power Query, and a couple of questions came out about how to set some of the query editor defaults. So let's have a look at how to do that. So here in Excel, I'm just going to open up a new blank workbook, and if I go into my data ribbon and get data, I can launch my query editor here without actually constructing a query. So that's what I'm doing. I'm opening up the query editor, and the main thing that people wanted to do was to change the query editor default from changing the type of data or detecting the type of data. So let's go into the options and settings and the query options. And what we can do in this dialog is, where the current workbook is on data load, we can turn off the type detection. Now the issue with this is only for the current workbook. Now if we go into the global settings for the data load, we don't have that option in here. But that doesn't matter because we've set this for the current workbook, so we'll click OK and close the editor. Now that's set in this workbook. So if I save this workbook as a template, then if I create any files based on this template in the future, they will also have that setting in the Power Query. So I'm going to call this no type detect, and this is obviously going to be a query. It's gone into my templates, and I'm going to say save. And now I'm going to close that file down. So I'll close the whole of Excel just to be absolutely sure it's closed and saved. I'm now going to open, and it's going to go into that start menu, and I'm going to say make a new one, and I'm going to go into personal, and it's got no type detection. So when I click on it now, it's opened up a new workbook, and I can now go into my data ribbon again, get data, launch the Power Query editor, and this time when I go into the options and settings for the Power Query editor, this has effectively made it a global setting. So it's got the settings, my data load type detection is turned off here. So that's good. This is a little bit fiddly though, because most people don't want to go into picking a template every time you do that. So what we can actually do is we can choose where this start location is. Well, we can't actually change that particular file unless we can find it, and it's actually very difficult to find. What we can do is we can find the Excel start menu, and if we put a file into there called book, then that will solve the problem. So I'm going to go into here, or into that one there. So that's the recent one. This is our no type detection. That's the one we just looked at. So this is the one that has the correct setting. Now I'm going to save it again, but before we do that, what I'm going to do is Alt F11. Now here's a little trick. If you've got the immediate window open, and if you don't, you can go to View and Immediate Window. You can ask Excel a question. So we're going to say application startup path. Now when I press enter, it tells me where the startup path is. Now that's very useful because it's different on different versions of Excel and different versions of Windows. So I've now copied that path. I can now close down my VB editor, and I can now save this one with F12, and instead of saving it into the default template location, I'm going to save it as a template into the path that I copied. Now I've gone into that Excel start path. I want to call this book, and I've got to save it as a template, so I'm making sure I've saved that as a template and press enter. Now I'm going to close it down. You're going to see this is not quite what we want to do, because when we open Excel now, it's kind of halfway there. If I open a new blank workbook, and I go into my data model and I say get data, let's go and look at the query editor, sorry, not data model, data ribbon. So now when I open up the query editor and I go to my settings, this is quite disappointing because it's not going to have the correct settings. And the reason is because blank workbook always will default to this setting here. So we need to tell it not to use blank workbook. So I'll just close that down, and I will do Control W to close down the file, which was the blank workbook file. And now if I do Control N, it makes a new one. So Control N will make a new one from my default template location. In other words, from that Excel startup, it will use book if book exists, otherwise it will use blank workbook. So because book does exist now, I can go into my query editor, and I can go into the options for the query editor. And now when I have a look here, my actual file options, it has been turned off. So that's good. Now we're almost there, because I want this to start up immediately when I start Excel. So I'm just going to go into my options, and under general I'll scroll right down to the bottom, and I'm going to say don't show the startup screen when the application starts, and click OK. Now I'm going to close Excel down and restart Excel, and instantly it's going to do a Control N. In other words, it's going to create a new one. It's not going to go into the start menu, and this is the correct one. So this is now the one that has the data type detection turned off. So if I go into my options and settings here for the query, effectively now what I've done is I've made it so that that is a global setting. On any Excel that I open up, any new files that I create will have that turned off. Okay, a little bit of a long-winded process to get there. However, it may well be worth doing if you are always wanting to delete those steps whenever they appear. Do be aware that it only affects the data load, data type detection. Once you've done things within the data later down in different steps, it may still apply a change type, but it takes away the problem on data load. I hope that's been useful, and once more, thank you for listening.